Hello everyone, thank you for being here again. Today it's 19 November 2018 and we are very glad that the Afterworks are following and moreover today because Albert Castellana is here, he's the one who introduced me to the blockchain in the case, so thank you very much Albert. And apart from that, he's going to explain us a very a new tool on the DLT space, which I have to say that blockchain has to evolve, no? And in this evolving, we have new tools that are coming, and I don't want to say that blockchain is expired, but as we see in the internet, technologies were moving very fast, and thank you Albert today for presenting us a new tool that perhaps will be the next step. Thank you. The floor is yours.
You got it. Thank you, everyone. First of all, I didn't bring my roll-up. The roll-up, the slogan is blockchain, your name is numbered. Right? So things are changing. We need to be understanding why things are changing. And I'm here to basically explain why this is the case. Right? I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have been listening about and hearing about scalability. I don't know how many of you feel comfortable about the topic. Does everyone understand what scalability is? Who doesn't understand fully? Right? It's pretty good. One, okay. So we're going to try to cover the basics, okay? I'm going to be talking about Radix. Radix is a new architecture from scratch, but I'm not going to be focusing on that. I'm actually going to be discussing the path to Radix, okay? Thank you for having me here. I love being here as much as I can, and I really like to thank you, Alex, for organizing this, every week. That's really good. So, getting started. We're going to be discussing what is scalability, what is the challenge with scalability. We're going to discuss a new path, and finally we're going to be talking what it means to be building on Radix. For starters, I'd like to explain what Radix is, right? So basically, it's a speedy alternative to blockchains and DAX. What does that mean, right? Well, as you know, right now, Bitcoin allows for about 7 transactions per second. Ethereum about 14, 20, something like this, okay? That's not really scalable, right? We cannot really put the entire Visa, transaction system on something like Bitcoin. So we need to figure out a way to improve this, right? Some of the capabilities that Radix has is basically, this is really slow, Right. Let me go through this faster. Cool. So basically, unlike Bitcoin and other DAX like IOTA, for example, what we offer are very clear things. We offer linear scalability. What does that mean? We're going to look into it later. But basically, is that we have no top. There's no roof on how much scalability we can offer. There's basically almost unlimited scalability. That's how many transactions per second we can do. We achieve this with basically transactions that take less than a second, so average 0.2 seconds, and that have finality, we're going to discuss this later as well, in less than 5 seconds. Which means that what right now you're waiting on Bitcoin about 6 hours or something like this, we're giving you in 5 seconds. Okay? Finally, transactions, because there's no mining, can be extremely cheap. There's no mining. We don't need any of that. Which means that all our nodes are just doing useful work. And that's because of this, we can actually allow for less than 1 cent transaction fees. Actually, like 1,000th of a cent potentially. How did all of this start? So basically, there's a guy called Dan Hughes. He's been working on this project for about 6 years now. He started looking into Bitcoin, saw the issues that Bitcoin would have, the limiting throughput that it actually allows for. As you may know, there's a limit on how many transactions per second a blockchain can allow. It's about 500 transactions per second. That's very low. And from here, you basically have to start breaking down the consensus algorithm to try to cheat that. Okay? So we're going to be exploring that as well. After that, he started looking into DAX. That's 4 years ago or something like this. He was quite pumped about this, but quickly realized that there were some blockings as well, and that wouldn't really scale forever, right? So some other things, some other approach had to be taken. And finally, he looked into what the different kind of consensus algorithms were, like proof of work, proof of stake, voting. All of these things have their own issues as well. For example, you can abuse proof of work on a private ledger. That's a problem, right? Proof of work is using a lot of energy. That's another problem. We're trying to solve all these problems, and our goal is basically to, okay, how can we actually make it so that, actually 7 billion people on the world can be in the same ledger. So if we want to have all, 7 billion devices, 70 billion devices, IoT devices that are going to be here in like 5 years, if we want 7 billion people to be transacting through the same network, we cannot be doing just, a few thousand transactions per second. We need to solve this in another way, right? So that's the goal, allowing for so many people, all of these people, to transact in the same platform, right? What does that mean? Well, Ethereum, like I said, allows for 20 transactions per second. Visa allows for 50,000 transactions per second. Then Alipay is about 80,000 transactions per second. Like, even if we do, 500 transactions per second, or if we, centralize it a lot, like some cases, and we get to 8,000 transactions per second, we're still way below all of these applications. This is, like, right now, Alipay is empowering the whole China, right? We need to get closer to that than not just, a few thousands. We're trying to solve this. On top of this, I don't know if you know, but something like the CryptoKitties cannot happen. We cannot be working on a protocol, building our applications or systems or businesses in a protocol that at any point in time, a CryptoKitties appears, and then you don't have any more throughput for you. The pipe doesn't have any more room for your application. And then you basically have to either shut down, fork the entire ledger, or migrate into another one. That's not really good. So, why is this so much of an issue, right? So, for the person that didn't know what scalability is, we're basically talking about how many transactions per second can be allowed for in the same ledger, right? So we all know that a blockchain, for example, is just a distributed ledger technology architecture that allows for some people to be interacting freely, right? If I have an account, I can easily write something with my private key onto the ledger, and then nodes will validate what I just said, see if it makes sense, and then pass it through, right? Why cannot we achieve something like this with basically millions of transactions per second? There must be an issue somewhere, right? So what I'm going to be talking about is basically explaining why this is. Why is this so much of a problem, right? And we're going to be starting with a simple one, right? So there's this formula. There's this trifecta, right? So on most DLTs, there was, up until now at least, this trifecta. If you choose of these two, you'll have to leave the third, right? So on a blockchain, you can have really, really scalable and real secure, but you'll have to cut off on decentralization, which is basically what the resilience of the ledger is, right? If you don't want a third party to be able to come up and just shut it down, then you have to figure out a way to make it decentralized, right? The problem until now is that all the different approaches that we saw are always lacking in at least one of these three things. For example, if we look into the blockchain, what's happening here is that all the nodes need to be looking into this, right? So we have a problem. We have a problem of synchronicity. My battery is running low now. So we have a problem of synchronicity. If all the nodes have to be waiting for all the different nodes to be passing along the same last block to be able to start and add new transactions, the more nodes there are, the slower it gets. There's an overhead on how many nodes can be on the ledger. There's an overhead for every single node that we add to the ledger because, well, everyone else needs to pass it to another node and wait for him. If that node is really slow, you have a problem, right? That's a problem. So that's why right now some cases, some platforms are trying to centralize this in different ways, no? we're going to look into this. For example, like I say, one thing you can do is basically make your block bigger, right? Well, you saw what happened just last year on Beacon and trying to make the block from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes, right? So you saw what kind of an issue that was. That brings to centralization. People cannot be transferring 30 gigabyte block every 10 minutes. Just doesn't work, right? So that clearly is an issue. If you're not doing this, you're going to go above the 500 transactions per second. So, problem. If we do something like, what if we did something like sharding? What does that mean, right? So what if we did that some of the nodes take care of one thing, and some of the nodes take care of another thing, right? Then the problem is, how do we know that someone from one here is sending to here, and how do they trust each other, right? And that's basically the problem that right now Ethereum is facing. What do? They have to find a main chain. They have to find somewhere where all these transactions have to be going together and agreeing on what happened. That's basically centralized as well. There's more than, yeah, it's actually centralized. There is a bottleneck on that middle chain, main chain, right? What if we did something like, there's only a few bunch of nodes out of all of them that can actually validate new transactions. That's what EOS is doing, right? There's 21 block producers. There can be 10,000 nodes. There's only 21 block producers, which means that there's only 21 people that have to agree on doing anything for them to be able to tell the rest, yeah, this is what we want to happen, right? Obviously, there's some limitations here, but there's so many different tricks that you can play. This is the danger. And actually, this plays to this formula. It basically tells you that, the fragility of a network depends on how many consensus nodes there are divided by how many nodes there are, right? If this is close to 1, this is good. The closer it gets to 0, it's bad, more fragile, right? So in EOS, we're talking about like 10,000 nodes on the bottom and 21 on the top. We don't like this. We want to try to improve this. So, what else can we do? I already discussed how main chains and stuff like that work. Just taking this time. As you see here, obviously, if we know that this main chain can only have 500 transactions per second, this means that basically it can only have 500 side chains, right? You can tweak that, you can change the block times and stuff like that. Eventually, it will become a problem. We're trying to solve it. Have you guys heard about DAX? You know what a directed acyclic graph is? No. So I'm pretty sure that you've heard about IOTA, for example, or even Hashgraph, right? What they do is basically say, okay, so we already know that dealing with blocks is not cool. We have to wait for the blocks, and that's a problem, right? We have to wait for the blocks, that synchronicity, and that brings the throughput problem, right? What if we don't do blocks? Why don't we just break them up? And we say, instead of having blocks, I'm going to have transactions. And I'm going to link the transactions between themselves, right? So I'm going to make it so that every time that I create a new transaction, I don't know if that's okay, yeah. Every time that I create a new transaction, this one, for example, I have to pick 2 previous transactions that everyone has agreed and that everyone, quote, likes, and then I have to point them. Instead of having my last block, I have my last 2 transactions, right? The problem with this is that you still have synchronicity. Not as much as a blockchain, for example, but you still do. Why? The reason for this is that 2. First of all, you have to wait to pick a nice tip. So this one is a tip before this guy was added, right? This one was a tip. And this as well, right? But what happens if, for example, someone now picks, for example, this and this to create another transaction, and no one uses that transaction ever again? Well, what that would mean is that if someone else came with a longer chain of transactions that actually destroys that one, invalidates that transaction, the longer chain would win in this case. That's not good. That's what's bringing this synchronicity. You have to wait to see if other people are following on your transactions, and if they're not, you actually have to reattach your transactions. That's slow, right? And actually, if you actually want to make it even faster, the only way you can do it is pretty much through sharding as well. So basically splitting the network in two, for example, right? Just a second, cool. If you try to do this, then the problem is that how do you solve a double spend, right? So if you have something like this guy here has a transaction and is actually, you see, these outputs are being used in both sides, right? How does this guy know that it was already used over there? That's the problem with IOTA right now, right? So they need to have something called a coordinator, which is basically this guy over here, which is listening there and trying to make sure that these transactions make sense, right? Doesn't work. So you can see how that's centralized, right? Like that's actually a server just doing that, right? Again, consensus nodes divided by network nodes, right? So, a new path. How do we solve this? First of all, is there any questions so far? No? Cool. Are you super lost or super happy? Awesome. So, why don't we try to group related transactions and ungroup unrelated transactions, right? If I'm always transacting through my wallet, through my address, why are not all my transactions in the same nodes? And the ones that have nothing to do with me, why cannot they be just in other nodes, right? Radix is a completely new architecture. So we just saw blockchains, and we just saw DAX. And what I'm about to tell you is basically a completely new way of doing this. It's based on this, grouping related transactions and grouping the ones that are not related, right? What does that mean? Well, there's something called shards. I've already mentioned this a couple times. What it basically means is that one single ledger can have different groups of sub-ledgers. If you put all of them together, they are the same ledger, right? Now the thing is, how do you organize this ledger so that it actually doesn't add up more complexity and it doesn't add up more overhead? For example, if every time that we need more transaction throughput, we have to increase the number of shards, then we need somewhere to see how many shards there are right now. That's a problem. So what we do is we start with a pre-sharded space. We start with 2 at the power of 64 shards. What this means is that everyone in this room and everyone in the city will have their accounts on a different shard. What this means is that when any one of you transact with each other, your transactions, the ones related with you, will only be in the same set of computers, and the same for the other party. Now, other people that are not related to your transaction will not even know that that happens, right? How do we achieve this? Well, first of all, it's very important to have a specific amount of shards, right? So what we did is, why don't we just get something like Google, and we see how big Google is. Google is 10 exabytes of size. This is basically all of Google, YouTube, everything you want. All of them, 10 exabytes. What if we just put 10 exabytes in small little shards of basically 2 at the power of 64, so 18.4 quintillion shards. This would basically mean that each one of these shards would only have 5 bytes. The entire Google database in the same ledger, every one of these shards would just be 0.5 bytes. Okay? So, second, how do we achieve this? Like we said, each one of you will have an address, right? You're used to having addresses. Why don't we try to put your related transactions based on your address? Not on anything else, just not on contracts and stuff like that, but on addresses, right? If my address has a specific shard, and everyone else knows exactly where my shard is, so where my information is going, right? If I want to see Ferran's information, I just need his address, and I can go directly, without querying anyone, to his shard to ask that information, right? That's what we're trying to do. So a wallet address points to a shard address. And basically this means that, you see, my shard, for example, is this one over here, but there's so many. How do we do this? Well, what we do is that all of these shards, these so many shards, they're just virtual. They don't exist until someone actually uses them. What this means is that if we have something like a Raspberry Pi, and there are not many transactions in the network, this Raspberry Pi can have the entire shard space. Of course, as transactions increase, the more transactions there are, the Raspberry Pi falls behind. It cannot deal with so many transactions, so what it does is actually just downscale the amount of shards that it's covering, right? So it looks like something like this. We have a supercomputer up there, then we have all of the transactions, and a Raspberry Pi that may just have a few of them. But this depends on how many transactions there are in the ledger, what the size of the ledger is, and how many transactions per second the ledger is having right now, right? So it depends on the demand, and depends on the previous demand as well, right? What this means as well is that because we have no mining, every node, this device, can be mining, well, not mining, but getting fees through the validation of these transactions, right? And what it means is that our formula now means that every single node on the network is doing consensus, right? So it's the most anti-fragile that we can find. That's the goal. How to bring 7 billion people on the same platform, right? So how to give anyone, anywhere, friction-free access to the digital economy. We cannot do that if we just have a few 100 transactions per second. So, how do we do this? Just like last technical slide, it's basically, we are Byzantine fault tolerant and Byzantine fault detecting, right? So what we do is every transaction on the ledger, by default, is not guilty, right? It may be guilty only on its shard. So the shards have to look into them and validate them. But between the rest of them, between the rest of the shards, unless there's a problem, they just go with it, right? So if I send something to Ferran, my nodes will validate my part of the transaction, his nodes will validate his part of the transaction, and they will just believe on each other. The moment that one of our shards say that something's wrong, they will just tell each other and say, hey, something went wrong. What does this offer? This basically offers that without much more expense in terms of security, we're basically breaking completely out of any synchronization issues, which basically allows us to do almost infinite amount of transactions per second. 1 million transactions per second can be done with 10,000 nodes that come with Raspberry Pis, and that's basically 1 gigabyte of data per second of transaction. Finally,
sorry,
this is, yeah.
Question. The question. How much time does the system need to detect fraudulent transaction?
So at the beginning, remember we said, so it's 0.2 seconds for them both to spread. And then if there's a problem, they have to recalculate, and that will be the 5 seconds. So we have 5 seconds or less finality time, right? So basically, we're using a gossip protocol, which basically means that every, I don't know if you know what that is, but basically is that it's a networking protocol that allows for, if we send one person, then he will send to all his neighbors, and then it's like a virus, right? So it will be spreading really quickly. So just like in the 6 degrees of, of knowing somebody, like in 6 degrees to know Obama, the same way applies to this, right? Which means that it just has to do 6 jumps to make sure that every one of the nodes are already okay with this. And unless there's a problem, they will not roll back. If there was a problem, then we just have to roll back once or twice, and that's just a few milliseconds each time for both shards. So less than 5 seconds. This is basically like the summary of everything we said, right? We said that you can only choose one of these three, 2 of these 3. You will always be penalized on the other one. Usually what we're saying is that people are in order to try to improve their scalability, they reduce either their centralization or their security. Some of them actually do this. That's a worry, but people are not even like realizing what was there, and then we're actually solving the three of them. How are you all? You guys tired? Want to continue?
Yeah.
Yeah, questions? Okay, almost there. So now, building robotics, okay? For those of you who have already heard me speak about these things, I don't like smart contracts, okay? The reason for this is they're really, really, really hard to implement. They're really expensive, right? We're migrating from something that everyone knows into something that nobody knows, right? When Bitcoin was created, the big breakthrough is that up until now, banks had to be adding so much complexity in their code bases to make sure that those transactions were valid. With Bitcoin, it's just one single line of code. With smart contracts, we have to get back to adding all that code, all those constraints that we have to put into the ledger. Okay? Now, I don't like that. What I like is trying to move complexity from the application layer into the protocol layer, right? What's the protocol? Well, some would argue that something like Ethereum, smart contracts, become part of the protocol. But I actually have to recode it every single time, so it's not protocol for me. It's not something I can use, it's something I have to build and then use, right? So I'm not just using it. Smart contracts, like I'm saying, are really expensive and complex, right? And insecure in some ways. We've already seen what happened, right? How do we do this? Okay, why don't we just get very specific building blocks that we can use constantly, right? So right now, for example, on Ethereum, most of the smart contracts are basically tokens and multi-signature accounts. Those are most of the smart contracts, right? Why aren't those built into the protocol itself? Why do we allow people to have to code their own instead of just, one single API call to the ledger, to the nodes, and say, I want to create a smart, just a multi-sig account, or one single API call, and I want to create a new token, right? That's what I would like, right? That's what Bitcoin brought us. That's so cool. I don't want to deal with all that complexity. So what we're doing here is we're basically bringing to our customers, to the developers, all the different building blocks that they can use easily, right? And thanks to this, they can do so many things with just one single line of code, right? So a few examples, for example, obviously is payments, right? So I can send you all, a transaction. We have a native token, right? That's something we can obviously do. But then we can do stuff like loyalty points. You can do things like coupons. All of this just with a few lines of code. You don't need to wait for anyone or any auditor to be able to look into your code and see how that happens, right? We can do stuff like supply chain tracking, there's a sensor, because any device can actually run this. They can be even, like validating transactions. If it's an IoT device, they won't, just because of their broadband, like networking capabilities. But for them, it's as simple as, one single API call and a message is sent into the account that's like, that's representing this box, for example, right? Or finally, I'll show you an example. All of these are just technical, but I'm trying to make it as simple and easy as possible. Last one, okay? Imagine that we have a factory. This factory has a stop button, right? And if 2 out of 3 groups, which is basically 3 out of 3 sensors, or 2 of the n amount of people that have a controller token on their account, or the administrator, if they want to press the button, 2 out of these 3 have to agree on this. Okay? Obviously, I want that if the sensor detects that something's wrong, well, the admin will get a notification directly, right? So it will know. The ledger, one of the constraints, one of the rules that this ledger has, is that it has to go and tell the admin, hey admin, something's wrong. Can you look into this? And then he can just sign it, right? How much code do you think that this requires on a traditional server? How much would that cost me? I'm pretty sure, well, for those of you who are coders here, you know that this is not cheap, right? 4 lines of code. Because I'm just relying on the protocol understands something that's a multi-sig. It understands the format, and we're just writing those 4 lines over there, in the ledger, inside of this box over here, in the box right there, right? So I just put this here. Nothing else. That's all the code that I need. And it automatically does this. It makes sense. It makes sure that if those rules are met, then the button will be pressed. And basically that's it. I think that's quite broad. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm open for any questions.
What about the token economics of Radix network itself? Is it defined, or you are still defining it?
They are defined.
It's gonna.
Now, the problem is that they're not shared.
It's
So
gonna be out soon, or what?
the problem is that they're not shared. So I can tell you what's going to happen, right? More or less. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a protocol that's going to be managing the supply of tokens. Basically, managing the supply means creating new ones and destroying old ones, right? And by doing this, what's going to happen is that we're going to have a low volatility token. At the beginning, it's going to be very volatile. After a while, it won't be so much. But we haven't released the paper yet, so I'm afraid I cannot disclose anything right now. I'm pretty sure that.
But
yeah.
there is a reason of why making this low volatile token. Because when the network grows, the volatility tends to drop itself. I mean, Bitcoin at 100 billion market cap, it's not as volatile as it was at 1 billion. So there is a reason for that, or?
Obviously, I'm a Bitcoin fan, right?
Yeah.
But we cannot say that Bitcoin is not volatile.
Yeah, it is.
Like it was at $20,000 just a few months ago, right? Like today it was like 8% down. That's not volatile. So if we want people to be able to build on top of this, we need fees to be predictable. We need these people to be able to spend these tokens, right? At the same time, we want people to be able to invest here, right? So they have to be there has to be movement. So that's a necessity, right? But both things can be achieved if you do it in a certain manner, right? And we believe we found a way so that it can be, it can make sense to participate in the system, and quite early it makes sense for everyone to, well, basically it makes sense for everyone. It's just like it becomes less volatile, right? On top of this, the big question is less volatile against what, right? Again, this is all going to be covered in the paper.
And which technology is going to control this string of supply, or is it going to be a centralized thing, or what?
No. All the nodes in the ledger, all of them will, in their code base, have the rules for this.
Okay.
The rules will be open for everyone to see. You can look at them, you can see, you can tamper everything you want. But there's, mathematically speaking, we're very, very confident. So it's fine. All the nodes. So, for example, one big question is governance, right? How are we going to do the governance if we want something like this to change? Because we have zero control over what can happen here, right? We set up the rules, we launch it, but after that, people have to figure out a way to update it and see if something has changed, right? So the dollar just collapsed. What can we do, right? All of this has to be in here, but this will not be controlled by us.
What about it's an open ledger. What about privacy concerns? Is there a possibility to put a layer on top, like Enigma or something like that?
So we have on our long-term roadmap privacy, right? We think that, I've been living in this space for a while now, earning my bucks from here, right? From working at somewhere and having your boss know exactly how much you have, how much you spend, what you're doing with it. Not good, right? It's definitely something that is important. At the same time, right now we're already covering quite a lot of things that we think that are very, very important. And at this point right now, maybe less than privacy, right? We still need to see what is the best way to implement privacy on a ledger. We haven't, there's not a definitive answer on the best way to do this. We don't know how exchanges will be dealing with privacy either, right? So in this case, for this matter, we'll rather wait a little bit and see what happens, see where the standards for the industry is going, and then probably like
Well, it's
follow that.
midterm mandatory anyway, you know?
Yeah, it's
considered.
not going to be next year,
Yeah.
but I would say that in a couple of few years, that's probably going to be around there.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of that. People going to be transacting on a completely open manner, right? I completely agree.
From a company to another, and,
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one very interesting thing about this is that because of the tempo consensus algorithm, which I haven't discussed at all, right? Like, for example, you could be asking me, so how do they know which transaction happened first, right? If I have, for example, in 10,000 nodes on the same universe, there's, I don't know, say 500 nodes for each one of these shards. What if I try to do a double spend in 5 different nodes of the same shard, right? And this is actually covered on the paper, which is basically through vector plots, just basically keeping a table of all the transactions that they have, and they spread this table around so that they can be comparing, right? But this is like really like very, very technical.
Yeah.
So yeah.
thank you.
Which would be the first incentivization like miners got with Bitcoin in joining Radix or implementing a node before something more complex gets built on top of that?
So in these kind of applications, right? Obviously, if there's not enough transactions in the ledger, right? It doesn't make much sense to be maintaining the ledger. You have to find ways to incentivize people to maintain these nodes. In these cases, the nodes, because of not having any kind of mining, it can be any device, right? Any device can be maintaining it. The moment that there's transactions in the network, there starts to be some incentivization. And at the same time, the economics, the way that we've defined them, will be sorting this out for the early on when there's not enough transactions per second, right? So there's going to be some kind of incentive to try to make it easy for nodes to participate early on, right?
What is the roadmap of that first launch?
So the Radix will be launched in mainnet around early next year. Actually, I forgot about that. I actually dropped my train of thought before. I was saying that because of this consensus algorithm being the same in a public ledger or in a private ledger, you can actually have both. And for example, company to company, they can actually be sharing a universe with the same rules, the same throughput, the same everything as the public.
Requirement, yeah. You
Exactly.
can have their own rules.
You don't have to have mining gear on your bank's data center to be able to transact there, right? And actually, because there's no blocks, you can actually tamper with transactions, previous ones that are already old, right? So everything that, like, if I actually have some obligation for GDPR or stuff like that to remove some data, as long as I know that I've had to do this, I can actually delete it, and the things will continue. There's no block. I can still follow the blocks because I just need the hash of that transaction, not the internals, not the data, right?
Could you explain a bit better why the virtual shards are overloading a small device, not only because of more transaction, because of also the speed of the transaction? I didn't get that part.
Can you repeat the last part, sort of this? Can you?
Yeah,
like
you say that
the shard.
Yes, you say that as the space is pre-sharded,
Mhm.
you can load the whole ledger
Yeah,
on a Raspberry Pi
absolutely.
because it's not used, it's virtual.
Mhm.
But as long as there are more transactions coming, and you say also, as long as the transaction speed is increasing, that overloads the device. I don't
Exactly.
get that second part,
Okay.
the
So-
speed.
Yeah, of course. I mean, basically, the more transactions per second
Yes.
on the ledger, right? If you have a node that has all the shards, basically the entire shard space, right?
Yes,
That basically means that it has to have bigger broadband, right?
okay.
If you have, just an IoT device, there's not enough, broadband to be able to, like, networking to be able to do this transaction, right?
That's the speed, okay.
Exactly. So it depends on the RAM, depends on the disk, it depends on the broadband, it depends on the like processing power as well.
What's your main competition at the moment? I mean, against what type of other projects are you fighting?
So like I said, we've been working on this for 6 years
Yeah.
right now, right? We started looking, like instead of going for an ICO and trying to raise as much money as soon as possible to be able to launch and then iterate from here, on something like a DLT, which is something very slow moving, you're going to be changing the entire architecture of a DLT because I don't have his signatures, right? So I cannot rebuild all the previous signatures in a completely different architecture, right? Because of this, Dan Hughes actually took the time to look into all the different approaches and actually go into a completely different ballpark. It's like it has nothing to do with blockchain. It has nothing to do with DAX, right? And because there's no other competitor that uses the same consensus algorithm as us, we believe that we have no competitor.
Okay. How many people are you in the team, and how are you funded right now?
We are self-funded. We started building up the team about a year ago, sort of, okay? Right now we're 21 people, out of which there's 11 or 12 developers.
Okay, so you wait for the token sale to have money to develop more and to promote this project?
So there's going to be no token sale.
No token sale.
No.
And how are you going to promote this project to be mainstream?
So right now what we've done is we've been self-funding it, right? So Dan has some funding, and then he put some funding, and then he actually got some friends from the community to participate as well. But that's super, super low scale, right? That's definitely not enough to now do a full-fledged marketing campaign or fight against something like EOS with $4 billion or something like that. Okay. Now at the same time, what this means as well is that we're starting with a very, very low market capitalization,
Yeah.
right? Which means as well that whatever we have grows faster, right? Depends on basically who trusts this technology or who not, right? So our way of thought right now is two things. First of all, we've proven scalability. We can show you that we're completely
So
confident.
you're not on mainnet, but the
We're
system
not.
works.
The system works.
Okay.
Now the problem is how do we make it so that people understand that this system works, right? But this doesn't go unnoticed. There's a lot of people in our network that already have seen this, right? And because we've been here for a while, we have broad network, right? Now, will this be enough to get mass? We'll see, right?
Okay. I didn't understand how you are planning to distribute tokens.
Mhm. That's because I didn't.
Okay. But
So,
if you don't sell them, how are people going to get them?
Because there's going to be the protocol itself,
Yeah.
there's going to be minting new tokens
Okay.
and distributing them in a way that it makes sense for investors to participate, for the token to be low volatile, and for you to be able to have some, right? Because obviously, some people have been waiting for about 6 years to participate here, to
Yeah.
have these tokens, right? They're probably not going to be selling they won, I'll just sell everything, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen, right? So we know this. We know that we don't want this either, right? This is not good. If people are not selling, then nobody else can participate, and then something like Zcash happens. It was up to 3,000 bitcoins per Zcash, right? We don't like that. We're trying to make it so that it's fair as possible. And to be able to do that, you have to allow the people to participate, right? What we do is we have a protocol, all the nodes have the same economic system. And basically we have a native DEX. I didn't say that, right? I forgot. So we have a native DEX. The platform itself, all the nodes have a DEX, right? They do all the other matching natively on the protocol, right?
Next, you mean decentralized?
Decentralized exchange. But it's not a smart contract. It's on the code of the node, right? So what this means is that we obviously have way higher throughput than most of the DEXs there. We don't have to wait for the smart contracts to be executing. There's actually one cryptocurrency, one asset pair, right? So if I'm changing, Bitcoin RAT, if I want to do that, that's going to be sitting on the same shard, which means that as many transactions as we can do in one single shard, that's the maximum throughput that we can have per asset pair, basically, right? So because of this, we're going to allow us for people to go into the DEX and buy RATs, basically, from the get-go, right? How? It's because we're going to have asset-backed tokens. that are like easy to do. Pretty much everyone can go into the ledger and build their own asset-backed tokens. So Tether, USD, like True USD or USDC or whatever you want, all of these things will easily be joining the platform, and then with these things you will have a way to actually not print, but buy new RADs from the decentral bank.
Okay. And do you plan RAD to be a currency? Is this one of the main ideas? Do you want to promote RAD as a mean of exchange, of a value exchange, or you want other tokens that are created on the platform to do that?
We want the RAD to be the mean of exchange within the platform. Right?
Okay,
But actually, without like outside,
yeah,
looking outside of the platform, because the RAD will be supporting so many different asset-backed tokens, will be more stable, right? It's what I was saying before, like stable against what, right? Is it like stable against the dollar, the Bitcoin, or itself, right? So these things are going to be coming up in the paper.
yeah.
So.
But I mean, with the velocity you have in the transactions, and the low fees, RAD would be an ideal currency.
Uh-huh.
But you don't plan to market RAD as a currency?
I don't see why not.
No, I don't know what I'm asking.
No, I don't see why not. I mean,
Okay.
the reason why we want it to be low volatility is because we want people to be able to be transacting with it. For example, because we have a less than 5 seconds finality time,
Yeah.
you can build a credit card, like a debit card, just using the ledger.
Okay.
Because you don't have to wait for
Yeah.
blocks or anything like this.
Okay, but if the asset is traded,
Mm-hmm.
how do you ensure there's low volatility? I don't understand.
It's a long paper.
Is it paper?
Yeah. Well, I'll share it with the group as soon as it comes out.
Okay.
It should be rather soon, actually. But yeah, please.
I guess the token economic structure of burning or what's the one?
Meeting.
Emitting or creating something. I guess it depends only on the volume, demand, or sell offer on the DEX, I guess. Only calculating the things that happens on the DEX itself. What happens if an exchange like Binance, external of this, has much way volume than the DEX itself, and the demand, then the system doesn't detect that, hey, the demand is going very up, we have to emit. Is going to be connected to all other sources, or
It will not be connected. But
okay.
what are you gonna do,
I'm gonna go to Binance and sell them.
right?
Yeah.
And a profit, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
But then you have
That's
high
it, yeah.
volatility.
Sorry? No, what I was saying before is that we're gonna have high volatility
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Okay.
Because all these arbitrage will be bringing new assets into the
But
platform.
the system only takes into account
Yes.
the on-dex.
Yes. Okay, I think that's all. Okay. So you're like
I like to put the, just the last thing. I think the disruptive innovation prisma, and what I've seen, it's basically that here we change one thing, which was a chain of blocks, and the longer the better, or the longer the right one, and we transform it into a matrix where everything is tied up, no?
Mhm.
So basically, PM, it could happen that if this application is taken into account and is becoming the new mainstream transformer, I'm thinking, basically, if you do that, we could take the old blockchains and put it inside this chain. Is this something you have thought, or is in the plan, or because finally you resolve the problems that the other ones have, no? But if we want to evolutionate and we don't want all the market of blockchain to fall down because now blockchain doesn't work anymore, no? We close it zero. Instead of making this zero, hey, we can import that database, that blockchain database into our spread it and tied up base. So I think it's a good idea. I don't know.
I think
If I'm telling too much.
I think it makes sense, right? Now the problem is who's gonna do it, right? Do people who have been working with with a single project, I don't know, Bitcoin developers, right?
Yeah.
Been working on the same project for 10 years. Do they want to forget their code base and jump into something that's not even out yet? Definitely not, right? So I think that first of all, we need to keep our, goals close. First of all is, okay, we need to come out. We need to demonstrate that this is the way to do it. Actually, like I cannot feel, like for us, this is like the standard of how to do a DLT, right? Are there other people going to be copying what we do, or just using it, or trying to improve on it? We don't know, right? But yeah, it's definitely an interesting part.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you very much.
Second topic.